Hello and welcome to The Switch. This is the series where we speak to inspirational people, each of them wildly successful in their own fields, about big turning points in their lives. I'm G Footit and I'm lucky enough to get the chance to quiz these people about the precise mix of skills, behaviours, traits, drive and sheer grit that got them to the top of their game. In particular, I'm interested in that pivotal point in their lives, the light bulb moment that propelled them to a new level. I want to drill down into that moment and find out what it was that convinced these remarkable people that they could switch up. But The Switch is also about you, and as the series continues to grow, we'll be taking questions for our guests. Are you content with your life or your career? Are you considering making a switch of your own? Or maybe you're looking for a new direction or the motivation to take a step up. Whatever your situation, I hope you'll take inspiration from this show. To fill you in about me, I work at the UK's largest provider of face-to-face financial advice, St James's Place, and I'm involved in their academy, which has so far trained 1,000 people to become financial advisors. These are people from all walks of life who decided to make a switch of their own. To help inspire others to do the same, no matter what kind of switch you're considering, we're talking to extraordinary leaders in various fields, including entertainment, sport, psychology, and in this special episode, a military veteran who helps military leavers into civilian roles, 25,000 of them in 2023. We've called this episode Bring It Every Day, as we talk about lifelong support for service leavers, veterans, reservists and their families. Our guest will give us insight into the significant transition they make from active service to civilian life and work, and how his work supports people find employment and gain financial independence. We'll also discuss the unique qualities and abilities of those who have served in the armed forces. Having worked at SJP for the last 5 years, I've worked with these organisations helping military families find new careers. But also behind the scenes, I've helped SJP achieve the Military Covenant Employer Silver Award, which we're really proud of. And this is a topic I'm extremely passionate about. Our guest is someone with a long and varied career. His path has taken him from commanding naval ships to working with service leavers and veterans to find them employment opportunities. After working in the private and third sector, and amongst other things creating media training programmes for service members at Forces Media Academy, he is now the CEO of Forces Employment Charity. Today I'm joined by Alistair Halliday. Alistair, welcome and thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Hi G, it's fantastic to be here. Thank you very much.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today. I know that your path has taken you on some really interesting places, both personally and professionally. So you are now the CEO of the Forces Employment Charity. But first, could you tell us a bit about how you came to join the naval service yourself?
Sure. So I joined the Royal Navy in 1977, way back, straight from school. I suppose I started to get interested in the last sort of couple of years and then thought I must give it a go. And the first thing was going straight through for Dartmouth, which is the initial entry training place. I joined as a seaman officer and very quickly started to really enjoy the life at sea. And I was lucky enough to be also sponsored through university as well. So in that first period, spent quite a bit of time in the Caribbean and then went out to Hong Kong at the end of my first year at university, gave me a great insight into some of the operations that the Royal Navy does. And then really sort of knuckled down to a number of jobs. In fact, served in about 15 ships over about 33 years or so, and really loving each one, going to various quite interesting parts of the world, doing a number of operations and stuff. And it was a fantastic period. By the end of that, of my last sort of 9 or 10 years, I suppose, was moving away from the seagoing bit to more land-based headquarters type roles, Ministry of Defence and everything, which actually for me, when I look back, gave me more of an insight into commercial civilian life, which helped my own personal transition. But my time in the Navy was fantastic and really enjoyed it.
Wow. When I hear somebody from the military reel off their experiences, and yours is extremely impressive, as a civilian, it does just all sound a little bit like a completely different world. So let's rewind a little bit before we go into some of those details. You mentioned you joined from school. Where did you grow up and where did you go to school? You mentioned Dartmouth. Were you near there?
I wasn't actually. I mean, I grew up in a place called Abingdon. I went to school there, and I didn't really have many military links. So my father was called up into the Navy right at the end of the war, but there was no sort of pressure. In fact, on my father's side, there was some seagoing, some merchant mariner type sort of fishermen off the southwest of Scotland, actually, but not really Royal Navy stuff. And I have to say, it was just a visit from the school when I was about 16, 17, from a Royal Marine officer. And he came. Before that, I probably thought that the Navy is a bit like being an astronaut or a train driver or a sailor. You have these sort of things as a young lad. And then when I met this individual, and he was so charismatic, and I just thought, I've really got to experience this somehow before knowing if I like it or not. And I went to a brand new ship at the time down in Southampton, had a good look around. I was very impressed by the quality of the ship's company, the officers in the ship's company, and had a couple of Bacardi and Cokes. And I thought, wow, this is great. So then joined, say, straight from school. And it was great. And I did think in that period, after the first year, perhaps it might be when I go to university, that'll be it. But I realised that I was enjoying it so much and just look forward to going back into it at the end of my time at university.
So it worked out really well for you. And you mentioned a 33-year career.
Yeah.
33 military years.
Yeah.
So of those 33 years, I'm sure there are so many, so it's going to be difficult. But what are some of the most memorable things? Let's start with places you visited.
Wow. I mean, gosh, Far East about 2 or 3 times. I mean, I do remember being in Hong Kong in 1979 at the time of the Vietnamese boat people. And again, a lot of Chinese illegal immigrants, gaining great insight. I remember being hugely proud to get my first watch at the age of 19, I suppose, on a ship on my own in the sort of South China Sea. That was a very vivid moment. Huge numbers of other great experiences, really, various numbers of ships throughout my time. I mean, I spent more time perhaps in destroyers and frigates as well as mine hunters. I suppose a significant time was command of my own ships. I was lucky enough to drive 3. First one was HMS Bridport, was a mine hunter. Then the second one was HMS Manchester. Third one was one called HMS Campbelltown. And in those, again, the depth and the breadth of the activities which you do are fantastic. So, yeah, places, I mean, Caribbean 4 or 5 times, Gulf 4 times. Actually, in HMS Campbelltown, we were privileged to go to visit Russia. Interesting in the current context, because those visits do not happen anymore. But we were celebrating the 60th anniversary of the first Arctic convoy in World War II. So we sailed and we went to St. Petersburg, to Baltisk, which is in the Baltic, and then went round to Murmansk and Archangel. And I always remember that period as we're getting very close and helping support what was going on in Russia at the time. And it's just very sad now, 25 years on from that, where we are, and there's certainly no visits like that. Hong Kong, I mean, again, many visits to the States. I mean, tremendous. And I think the Navy is an organisation which does work hard and plays hard. You have the hard-edged sort of capability of war fighting bit, but also when you turn up to a port, you switch to the diplomacy, and you're really showcasing Britain, the country, and the Royal Navy, all these various places around the world. And I really, really enjoyed that. So you support the Foreign Office, the ambassadors, the attachés, hugely in supporting Britain's interests worldwide, and I love that.
Fantastic. And just for my benefit, can you describe what a frigate is?
Yeah, frigate is a sort of a ship which is, I mean, sometimes people call it general purpose. It's more anti-submarine. It is got a number of roles. Normally, I mean, the first ones I was in had about 250 ships company. In fact, it was around 280. A destroyer doesn't necessarily nowadays mean it's bigger. It's more about air defence, and it's an aircraft giving support to or air defence protection for a task group. So, but in World War II, destroyers tended to be very fast and ships just slightly less than cruisers. So they're now quite similar sort of ships but different roles. And whereas a mine hunter is about 35 ships company, and lovely ships to understand ships companies, how they work, and you can try lots of things in a smaller ship which become a bit more difficult in a large one. Okay.
And did you ever go on a submarine?
I did. I visited. I spent a bit of time in submarines. I mean, a fantastically highly qualified people the submariners are. I mean, I think our submarine service is of particularly high quality, both for the kit and the way it's used. And I didn't spend too long, but I did spend some time and did dive in a couple. And it's quite an interesting environment as soon as you go between the waves, and all the sophistication of what the sensors can show the submarine and what you can then do, which then helped me later on when I was more in ships, searching for submarines, hunting them or operating with them, and understanding that insight you get from being underneath the waves was very, very valuable.
Absolutely. So my next question, and this might be difficult to pinpoint, but what were some of the most memorable or valuable things that you've learnt in those 33 years?
I think that there's a huge number of things, really. I mean, I suppose, the value of teamwork, trained teams working together, working up, understanding each other, and then really producing an outcome or a capability which is absolutely amazing. And that's a key thing about a ship. I think sometimes you can use that analogy with companies, with businesses, with work environment. A ship is something which you all go in the same place in the ship's company, from the captain through to a junior chef or a young stoker. Wherever you're all in it together. If it's rough weather, you're all experiencing the rough weather. And I think that sense of togetherness is really very special. I think there are so many other things which you understand leadership. I mean, sometimes I wonder, we come back to that great thing, are we born or made? There's a very interesting thing, how much of it is our own personalities, which are we're exploiting a bit in our time in the service, or is how much it is the training which is making us? I think the answer is a bit of both. I absolutely love the interaction with people, and I think to be effective, in the Royal Navy, you've got to, apart from understand the kit and the equipment, it's quite complex, you've got to really have a love and affection for ship's company, for sailors, what makes them tick. And I think that I really liked taking that into my civilian life, understanding all the people who work in the civilian workplace as well.
And what about things like discipline, getting up early? Is that a real key part of?
I think sometimes it might be overstated, actually. I mean, some people think it's all, the services, not just the Navy, the Armed Forces, the Army and the Air Force as well. It was all about giving orders or something. It's not actually at all. And I would say that the same issues happen exactly the same as in a civilian company about management. I mean, sailors are very canny, and somebody might be wandering around with stripes on their sleeve, but if they're not well respected, they will not get things done. I mean, sailors can find ways to not do it. So as it is, you then learn how to gain respect and how to get people to do things without actually giving them necessary direct orders. So I think it's clearly there are times in operational circumstances, particularly when, crikey, you're in the operations room and a missile's coming in, you've got to be acting pretty fast with reactions and giving direct orders. Same on the ship. If you're on the bridge and you're driving the ship alongside into a foreign port in a high wind, you've got to have people pretty quick to do things. So there are things at times when you are direct orders, and I think the discipline and the training cuts in with that. Most of the general time is all about management in exactly the same way it is in a company or in a charity or anywhere else in the civilian workplace.
So in working with people through the charity, do you experience their experience of maybe military stereotyping in civilian world, and can that negatively impact people?
Sure. I mean, I think it is an issue. I mean, obviously there are brilliant employers across the country, certainly out there, who have moved on and can see the value of service leavers, and they don't hold any of that. They just see the benefits. But there are employers in certain sectors who still think people who've served in the armed forces have some sort of stereotypes. It might be that they're just people who are just going to obey orders or something like that, or they're highly disciplined, but they don't have the ingenuity or the initiative to think for themselves. And so we do talk to our service leavers to be aware of this, and we also do a lot of chats with employers to offset that, because without a doubt it's far more, to be managing and being part of the armed forces community today is very different from what it was 20 years ago, certainly 30, 40 years ago. So people to succeed and spend any time in the armed forces today, many of the things are just like they are in the civvy street.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think often, and the statistics show, that people transitioning from the military often don't understand their own value or their own transferable skills. But what you've just described sounds extremely similar to the ship that I'm in is an organisation, and I really like that analogy, that we're all going in the same direction together. So what do you feel were the transferable skills that you took from all of those experiences you had over 33 years to your sort of now future work in Civvy Street?
Sure. I mean, there are quite a few, and the fascinating thing about this, is that you don't realise them at the time. When you're serving, you don't realise that it is a different thing, and some of the uniqueness of perhaps the skills and attributes that you're sort of building up. And the obvious ones are things like, perhaps let's say a sense of humour under pressure, loyalty, resilience, ability to get up in the middle of the night, trustworthiness, all of that, and reliability. All of those things which actually, when you then do leave and you go into organisation, you think, actually, these are quite valuable. I think perhaps when you're serving, you take it for granted, and you don't quite recognise those attributes. But there are quite a few, and I think one of the things which we do in my current organisation, the Forced Employment Charity, we spend a lot of time talking to service leavers and veterans and their spouses, giving them confidence to know what their strengths and their skills are. Clearly, there are quite a few people who do gain directly transferable skills, whether engineers or nuclear submariners or air engineers or some of these things which they can directly go in straight into a company, continue with those. But actually what's more important are those who can make the big switch, and they come from one role in the armed forces to a completely different sounding role, and with those more generic skills they can fit in very quickly.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So how did you find it yourself? You mentioned that you worked for the Ministry of Defence, so you moved away from sort of sea life to more of an office type of role, but it was still, I guess, quite a big transition for you. So how did you find it for you?
Well, for me personally, my own transition initially was, I could almost say, seamless, actually. I mean, I got a job with a company, it was called Raytheon. It's a big sort of engineering company, in a great role as a sort of program director and business development director. Some of the big organisation like that was quite like the Ministry of Defence in a way. I mean, quite processy, you could say, with lots of sort of systems in place, a bit like the Ministry of Defence. And I could use some of my experience in management, I suppose, straight into that role. I personally found my own challenge was about 3 or 4 years later, when after I'd left that company, trying to go to the next thing, and that's when I found it really hard to enter a different environment. So for me, the actual transition bit, the first bit, was actually pretty straightforward. I found then it was more challenging a few years later when I had to then do it and start again with other companies and go through all the process.
And that's really interesting. And I know that Forces Employment Charity looks after ex-military people forever. So it's not just that one first transition. No. It could be that second, third or fourth role afterwards.
Absolutely. I mean, in a way, we refer it to, as transition. I mean, transition, in the way it sort of defence looks at it, is about 2 years before people leave to about 2 years after. So there's that specific period focused on making the transition into civilian life. But we also support right way through life. And quite often people can make, a success of transition. They get a good job. I mean, in fact, the stats are very impressive, actually. The numbers of service leavers who get good jobs and within 6 months of leaving is very, very high indeed, which is great. But then what happens 2 years on, 4 years on, 10 years on? Sometimes people struggle or they're to the next role, and that's where we need to make sure we give them the right level of support whenever they need it throughout their lives.
So did you find when you made the first transition, commercial thinking, was that like quite a difference for you? It
is. I mean, in a way, there are various things which you get huge exposure to serving. I mean, you could say diplomacy, operations, engineering, all of these sort of things, quite a lot of technical stuff. The bits probably you do not do. You don't really get used to the sort of running P&L, some of the high-level finance stuff, and absolutely commercial. People say, oh, well, you lack commercial experience when you leave. And I was very lucky, I think, was the job I went into. Straight away, I had to understand it very quickly and spend a lot of time with my commercial team, understanding T's and C's in contracts and the legal aspects as well of sort of major contracts. So I was sort of forced into it. And very quickly, I would say, within 3 months or so, I realised now what it meant. when I look back at before I don't think I completely understood it, but it's not rocket science, obviously. It doesn't take very long. One of the things that perhaps I would say is the most, again, one of the, coming back to the sort of attributes, I think is the ability, people talk about training. People in the armed forces are very well trained, and that's great. The biggest thing about it, though, means that they're used to being trained and they are trainable.
I love that.
I think that is a major difference from just the courses they've done. It means that they're very quick and ready to take on something new and learn very quickly. And I think most people are ready to, once they get into a new organisation, wow, I don't know everything on day one, but I'll blooming learn it very quickly. I'll devote time, do the courses, do the training, speak to the right people, and then very quickly you learn these things. Commercial was a very big one for me. And I'm very glad I did all that time, because now in my job, running a quite a significant charity, it's very useful having that sort of commercial background, which I think I've got.
Fantastic. And while you were working with SSVC, you implemented media training at the Forces Media Academy. How did that opportunity arise, and what made you pursue that line of work?
It was a great thing. I mean, so SSVC and British Forces Broadcasting Service, as many people will know it as BFBS, is been going since sort of World War II. It's a fantastic organisation which has TV, radio, cinemas, lots of things for the armed forces for people to enjoy media as well as engage in it. And I went in an interesting role, actually, as the business development director, to find ways of developing new business, really. And it struck me very quickly that with the people there and the facilities, we could turn this into a training organisation as well as delivery, using the studios, using the equipment, and, of course, these amazing people who are presenters and all the rest of it. So we set up a training thing, and actually then got a grant to set up an academy, which I set up from scratch. In fact, from nothing to delivery of the first course was 9 months, which again I look back as a real. I'm very proud of that, including picking a building, devising a syllabus, recruiting staff, getting students selected for the first year. And it was terrific. And this was really for service leavers and or veterans who were interested in creative media, to give them a really good qualification and good experience to propel them into a career into the media. And actually it's been going for 5 years now, more than that, certainly since I left. I'm very, very proud. We actually then built on that, these big courses, to start doing media training and, for example, organisations like the Foreign Office used to train the ambassadors and heads of mission, deputy heads of mission as well in their media, social media training and understanding more about comms and internal comms.
Fantastic. It sounds absolutely fascinating. So this is the point in our interview where we're going to look at your light bulb moment. The point when somebody makes a switch to a whole new realm of success or a different career. So thinking of you personally, that point of transitioning from the naval service to civilian life must have been one of the most significant switches that you've had in your career. So what are the key traits that have fueled your drive and sense of purpose since the beginning of your career?
It's an interesting question. I mean, there are times when I would say, and this is how I now describe it to people, you have a plan A and it's worth sometimes working up a plan B, because the job you're in at the time hopefully is going really well and you're getting the right level of satisfaction and hopefully career opportunities which can support or be the right fit for you. But as most people know, at various stages in their lives, they may well be finding that they are treading water, or the circumstances aren't great, or they need to move, or whatever it is. And I think for me, I had about 31 years of I really loved it, and I just started to realise that at my time in the Ministry of Defence that it was starting to make me think I need to start thinking about transition and about moving on, and not really thinking I need to wait till the bitter end when there is a chop time, when literally your end of your whole time, and then you come to your last job and then you're out. I thought if I could do that slightly earlier, it might be useful. So I suppose in my head, it was working up the plan B, starting to explore what other companies, what other opportunities there are outside there. And I would again encourage people to do exactly this. And there is a moment, a sort of seminal moment, when you realise, plan B becomes plan A, and you switch to that, and that's the main priority. And for me, it was, I did my last two roles, and I enjoyed them a lot, but I just thought, I'm at a stage of my life, I want to now see what it's like, see how I get on in civilian life with a commercial employer. And the timing was about right for me.
Amazing. And how did serving in the Navy influence the skills and expertise that you developed across your career now?
I think I'm very fortunate, actually, if I'm honest. I think when you look back at the various roles and sort of there's some generic things which you do in the services in the Navy, which are some of the things we've touched on already. But I mean, in ships, all of those sort of attributes which you're doing, teamwork, all of that side, really rounds you as a person. I think that's one thing, and certainly them lucky enough to do the driving or in command as well, understanding a different dimension about leadership and things. I think that's really useful. But I was actually quite lucky that I did do quite a lot of media comms roles as well, right the way through my time in the Navy. I mean, my first job in a minesweeper, I was the navigating officer. About my fourth role was also the public relations officer. So you start, what does that mean? Well, you have a day's course in recite, I think I did, a bit of radio interviewing, and that's about it. And my second ship was a destroyer. I did a week's course, and I was interviewed by Kate Adie and things like that in a course environment. So I started to learn that, and so I then when you're in command, you're effectively the spokesman of that unit. So each port you go to, you give a press conference. So you're used to then talking about what the ship's role is, what the programme is, what you're doing, and I really enjoyed that. Then later on, so I suppose there was a theme which went through my service career, which was all around comms, which helped my time at BFBS, at SSVC, as it was, and particularly now when you're running a charity, which communication, messaging, understanding audiences, etc., is absolutely key. So I think there are quite a few of these things which seem to fit together in a nice way. I think that my experience in the Ministry of Defence also very useful. Staff work, papers, how ministers operate, how Whitehall works, etc. Again, when you come into sort of charity, the influencing piece for nowadays, like the Office of Veteran Affairs or the Ministry of Defence about veterans policy is part of the job. And I think these were all usefully. I was trialing some of these things quite a few years ago. So, without sounding too, I never sound complacent or anything, but I do feel these various experiences at various stages of my life have helped me enormously in what I'm currently doing.
And I loved what you said about Plan B suddenly becomes Plan A. And what are the things that need to be in place? Is confidence part of that? Like, what are the building blocks to
Absolutely, 100%. And I think there is the time when, I think, and I could talk more generally about everybody, but I mean, certainly for service leavers and veterans, when there is that realisation. I mean, everyone leaves the armed forces at some stage. Some people possibly leave it too long. Some people might leave too early. Everyone is different. And I think the important thing is every individual does it at the right time for them and their families. And I think when it comes to that period, to move the Plan B to Plan A, taking huge confidence from the service experience, but also a humility as well. I mean, the last thing any civilian employer wants to get is somebody who comes in and all they're talking about is Afghanistan or what they did and aren't they amazing. You do find that people are pretty modest overall, and they tend to talk about their teams. They don't talk about themselves as individuals, and that's another thing we have to generate when you're doing your own CV or you're going for an interview. Start thinking about yourself. Don't just say about the team. But we also temper that with but don't overdo it, and don't come across as sort of somebody who is, dare I say, a bit arrogant. Because the last thing a civilian employer wants to hear or meet is somebody who is not going to fit in. And that is probably the biggest thing which we get across to people. You need to be able to fit in. And there's no point in just resurrecting your service career all the time and banging it around, etc. When actually most people don't want to hear that all the time. So I think, and I think there's a general thing for anybody who anyone's listening, who's coming to the stage when they might want a transition, is having the confidence to think, yeah, there are skills that you've adopted, you've got over a number of years. Many of these things will be very useful in your next thing. And having that confidence, but with humility, I think is a key thing. And
I love that you experience lots of things to give you that confidence. I think that's really key. piece of advice. So you switched between sectors in your career, but what motivated you to return to working with service leavers, veterans and reservists and their families?
Well, I think when I left the Navy, I thought I had such a great time, and I wanted to get out, to leave, and then use my first thing as, well, I won't say a stepping stone, because to get away from defence. And many people want to do this. And so actually what I was doing, I was running a training business within Raytheon, and part of that was commercial training. It was like in the automotive industry type stuff, as well as military. And after that, I then did lots of bid work for companies, many of which were completely outside defence, and energy and utilities and this sort of thing. But I think the opportunity which came about, which was in Forces Broadcasting, was so attractive that got me in. Of course, and it is a charity. So BFBS, SSVC, as it was, is a charity, a military charity. And I found that coming back into it, I would almost say it has slightly sucked me all back into defence and the armed forces, which of course is an area which I do know a bit about. And so I suppose instead of going further afield into a completely different sector and learning loads of new things, I found myself being drawn into it. But then the other side of it is, and what drew me to my present role, is just how important this is about transition, supporting service leavers and veterans into jobs in sustainable employment is the most important thing we can do. If we don't get it right, a lot of them, bless them, may well end up having all sorts of other issues, debt, finance, perhaps a relationship breakdown. Next minute they're homeless, and then they're in trouble by people, veterans, if they're in a decent amount of work, getting paid, have status, all these other things. A lot of those problems go away, and so I think I'm hugely grateful for the fact I'm now in a position where I am helping that. So I'm very happy that I've been drawn back into the defence and the armed forces support area.
I love that. And do you feel like you're, in a way, playing forward your own knowledge, and you're sharing your success with others really does inspire the next generation of service leavers? Do you feel that sort of...
I do. I mean, and I think, again, I don't want to sound arrogant at all, but I just think I'm very glad, and if it helps to pass on some of my own experiences to help others who are coming through the same sort of journey, I'm very proud and very happy to be able to do that. I mean, it goes without saying is that some leave after a very short period. It could be, we support people who've done a couple of weeks in initial training, and they need a particular level of support. It could be somebody who's done 35, 40 years, who come out as a senior person, and everything in between. And so all of these different, huge numbers of different people, different experiences, different lengths of time they've served, I think is nuanced the actual level of support and the actual amount of guidance. And I do really enjoy being part of the support thing to give them to them.
I agree. And your team kindly shares some statistics with us for the show. And I wanted to talk around them not necessarily being about always military leavers. We had a discussion about people transitioning from other things, like could be professional sport as an example. There were sort of key similarities, and the one that springs to mind that compares both military and sport is that loss of identity.
Yes.
So 52% of veterans said they found their transition more difficult than expected. 57% stated that they'd experienced feelings of loss of identity since leaving the military, and 54% felt that it was important for them to retain a military identity.
Yeah.
So can you relate to those numbers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and it is a major thing. I mean, people join, having left their sort of school environment or whatever, or or a university or whatever, what they've been doing, and they join something which becomes rapidly not just a job but a way of life. Whether you're joining a regiment in the army, or the part of the Royal Air Force, or ships and stuff in the Royal Navy or the Royal Marines. That becomes, that identity, that serving piece is so hugely important. And it is a way of life. I mean, when I look back at my time, ships, it's certainly not a 9-to-5 job. I mean, you're going away for 6 or 9 months sometimes. You're working hard, you're doing everything. All your people, your work colleagues are your shipmates. You go run ashore with them. It's totally embracing the whole thing. And clearly moving from that to a civilian workplace is quite different. But we spend a lot of time talking to our people, our clients, our beneficiaries, etc., about not to worry about it. I think there is a sweet spot somewhere about being proud of your military background, but not letting it run everything and dominate going forward. The analogy I would use is you wear your regimental tie, but only at certain times. You don't want to be always known as that guy from the individual from the armed forces. So being able to fit in is a key thing, and you then find very rapidly you've got your own identity, your own thing, your own sort of place in outside the regiment. And it's a really important thing.
And we've already touched upon this earlier, but another key theme was sort of barriers to employment, one of them being people actually recognising their own skills.
Yep.
So 62% of veterans said that they sometimes underestimate the skills they develop during their military career. That's a high number, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest things which we have to make sure we do, make sure people are aware of what the experience, the value of that. And it's true. I mean, you just take it for granted. When you're serving, you just think, everyone does this, and it's only really after I left. Certainly for me, I wasn't aware when I left what these were. It's only now looking back, and certainly now having been much more used to civilian employers, companies, charities, etc. When I then look at why people in the armed forces have got those skills. So it is an absolutely key thing, and people don't know enough, and that's one of the reasons why we need to make sure. And actually, in women, as it turns out, we have to give even more support for that.
I can relate to that because there's a saying that a woman looks at a CV or a job description and, you want to tick at least 90%, if not 100% of, what you need to be able to do, whereas a man will happily go to an interview at 50, 60%. And I certainly feel that myself when I'm looking at other opportunities or thinking about my abilities. So I completely agree with that comment. So for people listening, they may be in the military, they're not, but they're on the verge of a career change. What key things have you learned from your experiences, or what advice would you give them? Because I think support's a key thing. You can talk about the support that the FEC offers, but people can, if they're ex-military, they can go to the FEC for that support. But if they're not military, they might need to think about the things that you offer and try and find that support elsewhere.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's huge amounts of support networks. I mean, I think, to be honest, people in the armed forces are actually quite lucky because there is a major programme, which is funded by the government. We call the Career Transition Partnership. So everyone who does serve is entitled to that. So the CTP is very, very important. I think it's fair to say that the armed forces people who serve are quite lucky that there is a very, very good programme for them called the Career Transition Partnership, which is a sort of a government-funded programme to support into civilian life. And this does go back for many years when, I think, going back to the end of the First World War, people realised mobilisation, demobilisation, we needed to support these people to get into industry, to help the economy and everything at huge scale. Nowadays, it's not the same sort of scale. It's about 15,000 who leave the armed forces in the UK each year, but still quite a big number. So I think that is a really key programme. There are a large number of sources of help, and certainly for people who've left the armed forces, that's one thing. People more generally, I mean, what I would say is that do tap into all the support mechanisms around. I mean, the armed forces has got a lot. I mean, my charity does support every aspect, including spouses and partners, and veterans, reservists, as well as those actually in transition. But I would say there's some sort of key things which we would always impart to anybody. Firstly, have a think about the areas you might be interested in, and then start to do the research. I mean, many people make a jump into something we think, well, don't know much about, and it might then not be the right thing for them. And this way, networking, of course, is absolutely key. And quite often people do find that they get better insights with talking to people they meet, or perhaps friends or relations even, can give them an insight into a different sector. And I think, importantly, is that for them or not for them? We actually are now doing more what we call sort of sector pathways. This is to help, coming back to the armed forces experience, people don't really know much at all when they're serving about the whole range of opportunities in the UK. There's about sort of 22 sectors or so. So we are setting up more things to understand, rather than talk to the first company have a group of people who can help, who are part of that structure. And there's a big one for the city of city veterans networks, etc., who can provide advice and to make people understand, is this for you? So I think networking, doing the research and then homing it down and then not being put off by, nobody would ever get the first job. It's very, very rare that happens. And just being resilient and persevere till you get the right outcome, I think.
I love that. And your advice in sort of going out there, exploring, experimenting, it's as valuable to know that a career path isn't for you than it is to find one that is. So you're just narrowing down until you find the right thing.
And I think it's true. I mean, and I think you make a great point about it's not. I mean, military is one example because people have been away. Perhaps it is a very different environment. But there are other examples. I mean, sporting industry. I mean, in fact, I met an amazing person on a train once who was an ex-ballet dancer who now set up a company to support ballet dancers transition from that role or that job or way of life into something new. And it's quite interesting. And again, when you think of people who are gymnasts or footballers, that people have been doing this right the way through from school as youngsters, and then they're doing it professionally, but it doesn't really last long. And it's a major change they have to make. And recognising those sort of skills which they've learnt for sports people, resilience, the training, the sort of willpower really which comes into it to be successful as a sports person is really huge, and all of that is going to be very attractive to an employer.
Absolutely. So there have been other key switches in your career. One of the biggest, by the sound of things, was the merging of the Forces Employment Charity with the Officers Association. How did that opportunity arise, and how did joining the two organisations push your work to a new level?
That's a great question. I mean, I joined the organisation. It was called RFEA, Regular Forces Employment Association. So it's been going since 1885. It's a fantastically long and well-established charity. The Officers Association was a separate charity dealing solely with officers, set up at the end of the First World War, and we had a very good relationships with them. We knew that we were doing some similar stuff, and it was better actually to be doing it all together. And I think this is a theme now for quite a few charities today. You could say with reduced resources, it's better to make sure that you rationalise, get the best structures to support your beneficiaries. And I think there'll be a few more which will follow as well, actually, in other areas, other charities. So the opportunity came around that we engaged, and I think the great thing about it was their trustees and their leadership of the Officers Association had very similar views to our the RFEA's ones, and so we brought this sort of bringing together of minds. And I think for anyone who's interested in it, it's not sort of like a merger acquisition type thing. There are some similarities. The biggest criteria is what is in the best interest of our beneficiaries, what is in the best interest of our service leavers, veterans. And if we think having a single organisation completely dedicated to employment is the right thing, then that's the way to go. And that was the overarching thing. Clearly a lot of hoops to go through, a lot of governance, a lot of things, and a bit of process to go through. But it was a great achievement to do that merger or combination of these two great charities into one. And I'm really proud of it.
Absolutely. And I've been working with you over that sort of that journey. So I'm excited for what this year brings for us all.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges people need to adapt to when they're preparing to make significant changes? One of them, I believe, is imposter syndrome. Is that something that you're familiar with? And if so, how would you advise somebody to get over that?
Absolutely, 100%. It's huge, really. And for some of the reasons we've been talking about already, people in the military, they think, God, that job, I could never do that. And they quite often rule themselves out, and they don't need to. So I think it is a real issue, something which we need to overcome, and it quite often could be a transition into another sector. You think, wow, what is needed in that? And so I think we do need to, in our work, and I think I encourage anyone to building confidence to sort of overcome that imposter syndrome, to give it a go. And I think we were mentioning earlier on about women, perhaps even more particularly, do suffer from imposter syndrome more. I think there's a very interesting issue that notwithstanding that, many service leavers or veterans, many male service leaving veterans might be underconfident, but the reality is they will still be prepared to go for a job, and they may well blag it in some respects, whereas their female counterparts will not do that so much. And again, what we do, we have a military women programme for female veterans, and in fact our spouses programme as well, or partners. We spend a lot of time giving our military women, our female veterans, confidence to really go for it. And to be honest, the results are fantastic, and we are now seeing some amazing women from their experience in the services, or as a partner or a spouse of somebody who's serving, go into some amazing roles in quite often in sectors which nobody would expect it. Right now, we're getting a lot into the tech cyber sectors, which of course think about for those with child caring responsibilities, etc., can help if they're going to be working from home in a sort of cyber role. An area where 5 or 10 years there were hardly any women in that area. Now we've got a really great career path into that, and they're being very successful.
Fantastic. And SJP Academy are going to be at the Women into Employment event later this year. And we've also agreed to sponsor Career Pursuit, which is the magazine for military families. And they've got a special entrepreneur section, which we're sponsoring this year. So we're super excited to help with both of those and meet some great people who might want to become financial advisors. Now, timing. Is there an ideal time to make a significant change, or is there never an ideal time?
That's a great question. That it really is. I mean, I probably would say there isn't really a specific time. I think it does vary. I would say perhaps more generally, if you look at somebody's career, it's probably not great to spend too much time jumping around too quickly. But it may well be somebody goes into, does changes, goes to a company or a new sector, and after a couple of years and just knows it's not the right thing. But normally it's pretty better if you can do up to about 5 years in something. But that's an overarching comment, but not being too prescriptive, because everyone is different, really. And the reasons why people might want to move on can vary hugely. It might be a family issue. It might be a family pressure. It might be a location issue. It might be just people getting unhappy or feeling unfulfilled with what they're doing. And in some respects, people talk about underemployment. Are people who leave the armed forces underemployed? And we're doing some work to work that out, because you could say some perhaps might sound they are, but then you talk to them and say, well, they're quite happy that they're in some crunchy job in the military, and they're quite happy to have a lesser role given the age they're at, and the fact they're now benefiting living in a part of the country where they want to. So there are a whole host of different things. So I think it's difficult to pin one thing on any particular time to do it. I think there's a build-up of time when you realise you start working up the plan B, and the moment that becomes plan A is the time.
Interesting. And we're recording this episode. I know it won't be released this month, but it's the new year. It's January, and that's often a time when people are reflective and they're setting themselves goals and things like that. So, interesting. As someone working to support people and gaining financial independence and careers outside of the armed forces, can you paint a picture of what success means for you personally?
I think it's very much success in providing high-end, the best level of support to enable so many of our beneficiaries get into sustainable jobs. I mean, that is the main thing which really motivates me, incentivises me in the job I want to do. I mean, it's all about people. It's all about these people who we want to support to make sure they make the best of their lives, really. We want to allow them to live fulfilling working lives right the way through their time. I think we also want to, and it gives me huge satisfaction, we can allow people to reach their own potential, whatever that is. And again, one of the reasons why we did the move with working very closely with the Officers Association was we wanted to remove the barrier necessarily of, what the rank you were when you left the armed forces, which actually in a way is irrelevant, of course. It's all about potential. So you may well have left the Marines as a corporal or a Marine or a young private. It doesn't matter. If you have the potential to achieve, to become a managing director of a company, that's brilliant. And our role now is to help that journey to make sure people can do that, not just a transition, but build their careers and achieve the potential that they've got. If we can do that, I'll be massively satisfied. And I suppose the other side of it is making sure my team, I've got about 195 people now across the UK, are all motivated, happy, enjoying their roles, to make them more effective in delivering that key outcome which we're trying to achieve.
Fantastic. And do you have any specific tips for people thinking about starting their own business?
Yes, I think self-employment or entrepreneurship is something which we haven't done too much in the past, but we work very closely with ex-Forces Enterprises and actually another charity called Heropreneurs, who do deliver some fantastic advice and support for this. Without doubt, people who serve in the armed forces have got huge amounts of initiative, and many are by nature quite entrepreneurial. And I think actually the support needed for them is to make sure that they've got a good idea, but actually is the market saturated? These sort of conversations about it might sound like a good idea, but actually it really is it. And so what you don't want is to encourage people to go into something which then they fail, because many people doing that do fail their business in the first couple of years. So making sure that sort of support, which those two organisations do. But I would say I know of many people who've left, and again, it doesn't matter what rank they were. Some, again, particularly Royal Marines, are very, very successful. They set up their own company. Within a couple of years, you meet them and they've got 20 people. You meet them after 4 years, they got 250 people. I mean, it is fantastic. So there are many people with the natural attributes to be very successful running their own companies, and we want to make sure we encourage that.
Absolutely. So this is an opportunity for you to do some plugging of Forces Employment Charity. Do you have any events coming up in the short term, or just want to share details of where they can find the charity?
Sure. So for anyone who's interested, we've obviously got a great website. We're linked into Career Transition Partnerships because we deliver about a third of that programme. But if you look at forcesemployment.org.uk, that is always a good thing. It shows the various programmes. We run 14 programmes to support various people, from leaving the services to military women to Operation OpNova, for those at risk of arrest or in the justice system. There's a whole raft of different programmes which we do, including our families programme for spouses, etc. So that is one thing. We do host a number of events, and it's fantastic that we're working very closely with St James's Place on some of these, and not least our Women into Employment event, which is coming up, which is becoming almost a flagship thing. And the last two have been incredible successes, and I know the next one will have even more people at it. When I hear the stories of women in that case who've got jobs as a direct outcome of the event, it is brilliant. So there are a number of these things. We're also doing careers in financial services, careers in energy, these sorts of things as well coming up. So all of the details are all on our website.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, Alistair, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing your history, your valuable learnings, your wisdom with everybody on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
We just recorded an episode of The Switch. I'm here with Alistair Halliday, military veteran, now Chief Executive of the Forces Employment Charity. And Alistair kindly shared his employment history, the big switches he's made in his life, and how he can help others do the same. Please like and subscribe to The Switch Career Change podcast.